The silence in a 12-year marriage doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow, agonizing erosion, like salt spray eating away at the iron pillars of a bridge, until one day, the whole structure just gives way to the sea. My name is Ethan Vance, and for over a decade I believed I was the architect of a beautiful American life. I spent my days in the grit and gray of the Columbus rail yards, managing the logistics of 1,000 moving parts. Also, my wife, Sarah, could live in the light. I was proud of her. When she started at Vane Associates, I cheered. When she got her first big commission, we opened a bottle of champagne that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I thought we were a team, but as I sat in our living room in Dublin, Ohio, on a humid Tuesday evening in April 2026, I realized I was just the foundation she was stepping on to reach something higher. Sarah was upstairs, the floorboards creaking under her hurried, excited pace. She was preparing for Julian Vane's 45th birthday gala. Julian, the man whose name was plastered on every sold sign in the high-end suburbs. To Sarah, he was a mentor, a visionary. To the city, he was a king. To me, he was a shadow that had been stretching across my marriage for 3 years, growing longer and colder with every late night at the office. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. Sarah emerged from the bedroom, a vision in midnight blue silk. She didn't ask how my day was. She didn't notice the dirt under my nails or the way my shoulders slumped from 10 hours of manual oversight at the yards. She just checked her reflection, applied a layer of crimson lipstick, and muttered something about being home late. The front door clicked shut, and in that moment, the simple man she thought she knew started to disappear. After the gala, I didn't sleep. I sat in my basement office, the blue light of 3 monitors reflecting off my glasses. I'm a logistics manager. My life is data. I had managed to clone Sarah's phone the week before using a recovery backup she'd left on the family cloud. Most of it was standard: soccer schedules, grocery lists, work emails. But there was a hidden partition, an app called Signal that was locked behind a secondary biometric. One I spent 6 hours that night bypass matching the encryption keys. When the messages finally loaded, I felt like I was looking into a different dimension. The messages between Sarah and Julian weren't just romantic, they were tactical. They spoke of the plan. They discussed how to liquidate our joint assets without triggering a red flag at the bank. Julian told her, "Ethan is a good provider, but he's a mule. He's built for the burden. You, Sarah, are built for the palace." Sarah's reply burned into my retinas. "I'm tired of being a mule's wife. I want the palace, Julian. I'm ready to leave it all behind, even the kids. They'll be fine with him. He's obsessed with them anyway." Before I followed her to the next event, I went into the garage. I sat on my workbench, surrounded by the tools of a man who builds things to last. I looked at the bike I'd repaired for Leo and the dollhouse I'd spent 6 weekends crafting for Mia, sanding every corner so they wouldn't get a splinter. I remembered Sarah's face when we first bought this house. She had cried with joy, clutching the keys as if they were made of solid gold. Somewhere between that day and tonight, the woman who loved us had been replaced by a woman who only loved more. I thought about our early years. We met at Ohio State. I was a logistics major with a plan. She was a communications major with a dream. We shared cheap pizza and talked about a future where we'd have a house with a wraparound porch and 3 kids. We got 2 out of 3. I worked double shifts so she could take unpaid internships. I stayed home with the baby so she could attend networking mixers. I was the silent partner in her success, the one who kept the engine running while she steered the car. I never realized she was planning on driving that car right over me. The Westin was a fortress of vanity. Valets in gold-trimmed vests whisked away Mercedes and Lexuses, while women in gowns that cost a year's tuition floated up the marble stairs. I entered through the loading dock, nodding to a guy named Mike I'd helped out with a late shipment of industrial refrigerators 3 months prior. "Working late, Vance?" he asked, barely looking up from his clipboard. "Always," I replied, my voice steady, though my heart was a drum in my chest. I made my way to the mezzanine, a narrow gallery used by photographers and light technicians. From there, the ballroom looked like a petri dish of social ambition. I scanned the crowd until I found the red hair I'd known since college. Sarah was standing next to Julian Vane. He was exactly what you'd expect. Tan, silver-haired, and wearing a suit that fit him like a second skin. He had his hand on the small of her back. It wasn't a professional gesture. It was an owner's gesture. And Sarah? She was leaning into it, laughing at a joke that clearly wasn't meant for anyone else. I felt a wave of nausea, followed by a cold, sharp clarity. The party reached its peak around 9 p.m. The band moved into a slow, sultry jazz set. Julian signaled to Sarah, a subtle tilt of his head toward the terrace. They moved with a synchronized grace that suggested they'd done this many times before. I moved through the light booth hallway, navigating the narrow passages I knew so well. I reached the heavy velvet drapes that separated the indoor VIP lounge from the outdoor balcony. The air outside was cool, scented with the expensive cigars Julian favored. I pressed my ear to the gap in the curtains, my breath hitching. "I can't do this much longer, Julian," Sarah said. Her voice was different, soft, pleading, desperate. "Ethan is a good man, but he's just so small. He doesn't see the world the way we do." Julian let out a low, patronizing chuckle. "He's a drone, Sarah. He provides the hive, but I provide the honey." Then came the hug. I peeked through the curtain. She was wrapped around him, her face buried in his chest. When she looked up, her words were a physical blow to my gut. "You're a real man, Julian. I love you. I'm finally ready to end it with him." Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. The next morning, I didn't confront her. I needed more than just a recording of a hug. I needed the mechanics of their destruction. I called Marcus, an old friend from the military who now worked as a private investigator. We met at a Greasy Spoon in Hilliard. Marcus handed me a file. "Julian Vane isn't just a real estate mogul, Ethan. He's a shark. He uses a guy named Dax Miller to do the dirty work, a low-level city official who flags houses for non-existent code violations." I decided to go undercover. I spent the next 3 days posing as a disgruntled contractor named Caleb at a local bar Dax frequented. It was a smoky dive called the Rusty Anchor. I bought Dax 3 rounds of top-shelf bourbon. By the 4th round, he started talking. Julian? He's the ghost of Columbus," Dax slurred. "He sends that pretty little redhead, your wife, to play the angel. She tells him the city's coming for the house, and then she offers him a lifeline from Vane Associates. It's a gold mine." I felt my stomach churn. Sarah wasn't just Julian's lover. She was his primary weapon. I recorded every word on a hidden mic. I didn't stop at recording Dax. I needed him to flip. 2 nights later, Marcus and I cornered him in the parking lot. I showed him the recordings and a folder of evidence we'd compiled on his own gambling debts. "Dax, you have 2 choices," I said, my voice as cold as the Ohio winter. "You can go down with Julian and Sarah for racketeering, or you can give the FBI everything you have on Julian's offshore kickbacks. You have 10 seconds to decide." Dax crumbled. He was a small man playing a big man's game. He handed over an encrypted thumb drive he'd kept as insurance. It contained the real ledger of Vane Associates. It showed that Sarah hadn't just been closing deals. She had been forging the signatures of elderly residents who refused to sign. She wasn't just a cheat. She was a criminal who had stolen the roofs over people's heads. This was the silver bullet I needed. I needed to see the damage firsthand. I drove to the Hilltop District to meet Mrs. Evelyn Gable. She was 84 and lived in a house that smelled like lavender and old books. She showed me the letters Sarah had written. "She was so sweet, Ethan," Mrs. Gable said, her eyes filling with tears. "She told me the city was going to condemn my house because of the roof. And she said I'd end up on the street if I didn't sell to her company for $30,000. I've lived here 50 years. My husband died in that bedroom." Sarah had used Mrs. Gable's grief as a bargaining chip. I looked at the roof. It was fine. Julian had sent a fake inspector to scare her. I visited 3 more families that week: the Rodriguezes, the Millers, the Clarks. Each story was the same. Sarah would arrive with cookies or flowers, play the concerned friend, and then strip them of their only asset. She wasn't building a career. She was building a graveyard of dreams. If you were in my shoes, standing in Mrs. Gable's garden, knowing your wife was the one who stole it, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments. While Sarah was working late, I was in our basement with Marcus, tracing the money. Here we discovered a series of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Every time Sarah closed a deal on a distressed property, a kickback was wired to an account under the name Bluebird Holdings. The signature on the incorporation papers wasn't Julian's. It was Sarah's. She was the one taking the fall if things went south. Julian was smarter than I thought. He was using her as a human shield. I found the emails where they discussed their exit strategy. They were waiting for a $50 million merger with Hudson Global, a New York firm. Once the check cleared, they were leaving for the Mediterranean. Sarah had already started looking at villas in Tuscany. She had even picked out a school for her future children, conveniently forgetting that Leo and Mia existed. Revenge, I realized, is just another form of logistics. It's about moving the right pieces at the right time. I contacted the FBI's white-collar crime division in Cincinnati. I didn't just give them a tip, I gave them a manual. I handed over the recordings from the rusty anchor, the fake inspection reports, and the offshore bank records. We need a public catalyst, the agent told me. We need something that prevents Julian from hiding behind his lawyers. I knew exactly what that catalyst would be, the Century Merger Gala. Julian was planning to sign the papers on a live-streamed event to show the world his transparency. I was going to give the world exactly what they wanted to see. I spent the next week learning the Westin's digital architecture, finding the back door to their massive ballroom display screens. The night of the gala arrived. Sarah looked at me with a pitying smile as she adjusted her $4,000 dress. "I'm sorry you have to work tonight, Ethan, but someone has to keep the lights on, right?" She laughed, a cold, brittle sound that made my skin crawl. "Don't wait up." I watched her drive away, knowing it was the last time she would ever feel superior to me. I met Marcus in a van parked in the Westin's basement. We had the signal jammers and the high-gain antennas. My heart was a lead weight in my chest, but my hands were cold and precise. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was the executioner. We tapped into the live feed that was being beamed to New York. The CEO of Hudson Global, a woman named Diane, was already on the screen, waiting for Julian's signature. Julian took the stage. The applause was deafening. He looked out over the crowd of Columbus's elite, his chest puffed out like a peacock. "Today," he began, "we show that the American dream is alive and well." He picked up the gold pen. I hit the enter key on my laptop. The screen behind him didn't show the Vane Associates logo. It flickered to black, and then the audio from the Terrace Gala played. "You're a real man, Julian. I love you." The ballroom went silent. Then the images began. Mrs. Gable crying in her garden, the fake inspection reports, the bank transfers to Bluebird Holdings, and finally the security footage of Julian meeting with his 22-year-old intern at a beach house in Florida. Sarah's face in the front row turned the color of ash. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in my story. Share your thoughts in the comments. The Hudson Global CEO didn't wait for an explanation. "The deal is dead, Julian, and our legal team will be in touch about the due diligence fraud." The feed cut to static. Julian turned toward the crowd, his face purple with rage. "Who did this?" he screamed. I stepped out from the wings of the stage, still wearing my work jacket. I didn't say anything at first. I just walked to the podium and took the gold pen from his hand. I looked at Sarah, who was trembling so hard she had to hold on to her chair. "A real man doesn't build a house on a foundation of lies, Sarah," I said into the microphone. "And a real man doesn't let his wife become a criminal for a man who doesn't even know her name." The doors burst open and the FBI flooded the room. Julian and Sarah were let out in handcuffs, their real lives ending in a storm of camera flashes. The trial was a media circus. Sarah's lawyer tried to paint me as a scorned, tech-savvy stalker. On the third day, he cross-examined me. "Mr. Vance, isn't it true you only did this because your ego was bruised? Because you couldn't provide the life your wife wanted?" I looked at him, and then I looked at the jury. "I provided a life built on truth," I said. "My wife chose a life built on theft. I didn't do this for my ego. I did it for Mrs. Gable and the Rodriguezes and for my children, who deserve to know that being a real man means having the courage to do what's right, even when it hurts. The courtroom was silent. Even Sarah's lawyer had nothing to say. The day of the sentencing was the hardest. Sarah stood before the judge, weeping and begging for a suspended sentence so she could be with her children, the same children she had planned to abandon. The judge looked at me. "Mr. Vance, do you have anything to say?" I stood up. I didn't look at Sarah. I looked at the judge. "Your Honor, 12 years ago, I promised to protect my wife. I spent every day of those 12 years fulfilling that promise. But Sarah didn't just betray me. She betrayed the very idea of a family. She sat at our dinner table and planned how to leave our children for a man who stole homes from grandmothers. She isn't a victim of Julian Vane. She was his architect. I asked for the maximum sentence. Not for me, but so my children grow up knowing that in this family, we answer for what we do." Julian Vane was sentenced to 18 years. Sarah was given 7. Because I had cooperated and provided the bulk of the evidence, the judge granted me full custody of Leo and Mia and 100% of the liquidated assets of the Vane shell companies. Assets I immediately used to reimburse the victims. I didn't keep a single cent of Julian's blood money. I sold the house in Dublin. We moved to a quiet town in the mountains of Pennsylvania. I changed our names. We became the Millers. I took a job as a logistics manager for a nonprofit that ships medical supplies to rural areas. It's quiet work, and it doesn't pay for $4,000 dresses. But my children are happy. They have a father who is present and a mother who is a memory they are slowly starting to forget. 2 years into her sentence, I visited Sarah. Not because I missed her, but because I needed to close the loop. She looked older, her red hair graying at the temples. "I hate you, Ethan," she whispered through the glass. "You took everything." "No, Sarah," I said quietly. "You gave it away. You traded a man who loved you for a man who used you. You traded your children for a villa in Tuscany that never existed." I stood up and walked away. I didn't look back. The real man she wanted was a ghost, and the man I had become was finally enough for me. Today I sit on the porch of our new house. Leo's building a birdhouse in the yard, and Mia is reading a book about the stars. The air is clean here, and the secrets are gone. I've met someone, a teacher named Elena. She knows my story, and she doesn't want a titan. She just wants a partner. The logistics of life are finally in balance. I learned that revenge isn't about hurting someone. It's about reclaiming your own story. Sarah and Julian are footnotes in a chapter I've already finished. My name is Ethan Miller, and I am finally home. Thank you so much for joining me on this 6,000-word journey with family secrets and revenge. This story is a reminder that the truth always finds a way out, and that a real man is defined by the promises he keeps, not the ones he breaks. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more cinematic stories, and share your final thoughts in the comments. Would you have gone to these lengths to protect your family? I'd love to hear your take. Until next time, stay vigilant and stay true to yourself.